in shadow of death, which was in a war zone, and death is all around when you're growing up in that kind of environment, obviously. But there's something else when you're cradling a beloved in your arms and you're looking really closely in sharp focus into the eyes of death. In that sense, you learn very different dynamics about who you are. That's the great gift, I guess.
Prove to me that you're alive.
Recording. What up, everybody? Welcome to Prove to Me That You're Alive Lightcast. I usually say the only show in the world, but today I'm gonna skip that and say welcome to the most shadow banned podcast in the world. Today we have a true gift, and obviously, me being on my spiritual journeys throughout life, I have come across this amazing human being, and I know all of you that have been on a spiritual journey once in your lifetime have heard the name. But when your wife starts speaking about another man so much, you have to pay attention, man. So I went back and shout out to Romania Poet for hooking this up, because she's the one that kept telling me, please invite. And so shout out to my beautiful wife. He is a true gift, a blessing, a pioneer, a prophet. He's been part of movies, which we're going to get into. And I'm gonna say this from the bottom of my heart, that this special human being has been the light to the world and has helped so many people spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And I couldn't be more honored and more privileged. And welcome everyone to Sacha Stone, baby. I'm gonna give a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here, Sacha. How are you?
I'm very good, and thank you for the very kind words. It's a beautiful morning here in Southeast Asia. I'm at my base in Bali. I just arrived here about 48 hours ago. I'm slightly jet lagged, but all good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, man. This means the world to me. I'll tell you honestly, like I go into these conversations dry, meaning when I think your assistant asked me, do I have some set of questions? I don't prepare questions, because I think if we're vibing, on a good frequency, then everything will flow out naturally. And I don't ever want anything to be like scripted or look like an interview or something. We're just, people, a student and a teacher, just kicking it, as we say in New York. Listen, Sacha, I know you talked about this a lot, but I wanted to ask you, um, maybe you can touch on your childhood, like, because I think your life journey has been so incredible. Like, where are you from? What was your childhood like, meaning from like a spiritual and emotional level? Like, maybe what were your parents like, or what were some of your heroes maybe, or how did you start to feel that you are coming into an awakening?
So my parents are very much alive and well. My father's based in England and my mother in Portugal, in Europe. But I grew up without a father. I didn't meet him until I was about 17. And that was at the end of the war that I grew up in. I grew up in sub-Saharan Africa with my mother and that side of the family. And there was no spiritual grounding in that sense. We were dodging bullets for the first 14 years of my life in the Rhodesian War or the Zimbabwean War for independence, depending on how you look at that particular orchestrated shit show. But there was no spiritual grounding in that sense whatsoever. Like I said, when you're in an African war zone, you're dodging bullets and trying to survive. The kind of spiritual dimension, I guess, kicked in later for me in my late teens, and then that was largely predicated on the influence of the mystical traditions of Sufism,
Hmm.
um, and that's evolved over the years. I became a student of the different scriptures, and I'm very steeped in the Christian metric. I became a student or a scholar of Islam for many years. When I was in my late 20s, I started studying that, but only because I wanted to understand it. I had a sense that the world was being orchestrated into a clash of civilizations connected to the Islamic and the Judeo-Christian mindsets. And I was still as I was kind of retiring from the rock and roll scene, that became my passion, but only because I was getting glimpses of, again, of this orchestration that was happening. And this was just before 9/11. And so I was absolutely right. And so those glimpses that I was having from 1999, 2000, 2001, that was the time when I was studying Islam feverishly. And I was also living largely in the Middle East at that time, traveling around, meeting with religious leaders, imams, and terrorist leaders, trying to network in to meet the kind of I guess the psychocultural leadership, which is somewhere between military, political factions and the religious leaders, the imams of the Middle East. So that became my whole obsession at that time. Was how do I wanted to learn directly from the man. I realized that the bogeyman was being orchestrated in the Middle East, that Islam was being weaponized, and that Christianity had already been fully weaponized in that sense. And you talk about those motherfuckers driving the war powers in the Pentagon in Washington and the United Nations. The Bush clan were really the Bush Clinton cabal were really weaponized and locked and loaded at that time. And it was so obvious to anyone in the know that was all just an orchestration. They were setting up Libya, Gaddafi, for catastrophic failure. They were setting up Hussein and Iraq for catastrophic failure. They were really moving on a complete collapse of civilization by fomenting a third world war in the Middle East. So that obsession of mine was, you're right, it was kind of prophetic, in as much as a lot of younger people who are very dispossessed with life and with reality start to go into their own zone, and which I was doing at that time, and digging into my deepest instinct. And I was right. And so I studied Islam in order to understand those different schools of Shafi, Hanbali, Hanafi, Maliki, different aspects of the Islamic mindset, so that I could conduct myself at a diplomatic level in the Middle East and in North Africa. And that's what I was doing. And that stood me in very good stead, but it didn't, it's not my spiritual persuasion, but I'll tell you, learning the mystical traditions of the Judaic faith. And I've got a tremendous respect and reverence for the mystical traditions of Judaism, as much as I do of the Christian mystical tradition and of the Islamist mystical tradition. And the Hindu, come to think of it. If you talk about the Upanishads and the Mahabharata and the great Hindu epics, which really are the underpinning to all of the religious mythologies that have engendered since. So there you have it. There is only one religion, and that is the religion of the human heart. In the great tradition of Tagore, the great Indian mystic, there is the religion of the human heart, and that's the only one that matters. And once we understand that all cultural proclivities and all cultural software has been installed, that's all it is. Culture is, as Terence McKenna wisely told us back in the day, culture is not your friend. And it never was. Culture can't be our friend. Culture is cult programming. And when we get that piece and step back from religiosity and from culture, and instead move into syntropy and into understanding that we're all completely connected, and that those sectarian ideas of spirituality are just that. They're just mind viruses that are variously interposed onto human beings by priesthoods. And priesthoods are the absolute scourge of humanity. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we all love about you, that you are truly like, this son of man, that from everything that you do and everything that you say is very much in trying to unify the human race. And I think, that's why we love you so much. I myself was born and raised in Ukraine. So when you speak of war, we have all been touched by, and when you speak about the cabal in Washington and maybe in the UK or whatever, I totally understand where you coming from. I wanted to ask you, because I think, you kind of went over through being in Rhodesia and going through war. I wanted to know, how did that impact you in that part of your life when you were still a kid? And how did you get to the point? I remember you famously said, I think when you came into the awakening is when you stopped being afraid of death. So it's like a two-part question. How did that impact you back then, if you can remember? And how did you get to the point where you had this realization that death doesn't exist in the way that we've been programmed to think?
So that's a uniquely difficult question for me to answer, because I don't know that I've yet processed that equation fully myself, and so I'm kind of reluctant to speak into it too much. It's actually only in the last year, in the last few months, that I've made peace with death, and that's because a girlfriend of the last few years, 7 years, just died a few weeks ago,
I'm so sorry
and
to hear that, man.
it's beautiful in its way. It's beautiful, and it's something I kept very private, but it's been the bane of my life, or not the bane. It's been the crux of my life for the last almost 3 years, was nursing her through her death, and having to be close to her and take her to multiple countries for treatment. She had an irretrievable genetic condition, so she was dying for a long time. She was a very beautiful, incredibly beautiful and noble soul. And watching her closely, very closely, over the last 2.5, almost 3 years, in her passage to death, and she died about 9 or 10 weeks ago, and I was there in Africa with her. I'd taken her finally to Africa. I'd taken her to multiple countries over the last couple of years in trying to kick that ball further down the road. But again, it was a very uniquely pervasive genetic predisposition, which one way or the other was going to kill her. And it was really, she's the one in recent weeks and months that guided me into death and into looking very closely into its eyes and not flinching, not blinking. So I've come away now. I'm still decompressing from that whole experience, because it was in that sense, the most stirring and moving and painful experience of my life. And I've not spoken publicly about it, and I keep that, my private life, I keep very private, always tried to. And so I never spoke in the last 2.5 years about what I was going through in that journey with her. But I can tell you that it's powerful. It's really powerful. I grew up in the shadow of war, in shadow of death, which was in a war zone, and death is all around when you're growing up in that kind of environment, obviously.
Yeah.
But there's something else when you're cradling a beloved in your arms, and you're looking really closely in sharp focus into the eyes of death. In that sense, you learn very different dynamics about who you are. That's the great gift, I guess, of death, and anyone who's been honest in the face of the death of a beloved knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes,
It's
sir.
such an incredible gift that comes with it, if you can have the courage to be very present in it and not try to flinch. And I know that in the case of my girlfriend, I trained myself, and I had 2.5 years to train myself into being very present
Yeah.
and not blinking, not flinching, not trying to filter out the experience. So I still haven't fully processed it, is what I'm saying. But I do know that that I'm completely unafraid of death, and I was not afraid of it as a child. Um, I've never been afraid of death in that sense. I've always had a sense of the continuum of life and of expression that is, to me, so obvious that one doesn't even need to intellectually think about, is there life after death? I think it's so unutterably nihilistic and stupid for anyone to even question whether there's life after. Obviously, there's fucking life after death, for Christ's sake. I mean, obviously, in order for you to even be positing the question in the living present means that life is infinite. So I don't get the mindset that is so binarized and locked into matrix think. And there's a lot of clever people out there who still are nihilistic, and but they don't have that sense of the spiritus, the continuum of the fabric of expression and reality is not woven into their being yet. And that's just a failure, a lack, or a failure to be present. Because if one is able to simply connect to the immanent living principle of being here now, then you know, without needing to do the intellectual or the spiritual gymnastics, you know that the ineffable immanent nature of reality is all pervasive. It's alpha omega. The question really is how can we take this fabric of reality and then conjure everything into our own imaginarium and then start to dream wisely? That's the real question.
Prove to me that you are alive.
Because when we dream wisely, we manifest a heavenly outcome. And when we dream badly, we manifest the apocalyptic scenarios that we're faced with in this world. So that's consensual bad dreaming is what defines the Gaza conflict or the Ukraine conflict, the Zimbabwean conflict that I grew up in. It's just, stupid humans falling victim to group shadow and dreaming badly. Now we're at this incredible kind of shift point where the nature of light is changing in the galactic plane sufficiently for us to be able to now dream and manifest outcomes almost instantaneously. We haven't quite maximized or hit that maximum yet of the so-called fifth density shift point, but it's racing toward us, so to speak, and to be sure, in our lifetime we do hit that maximum, and to the extent that we will be able to dream or think or ideate, and then almost instantly the manifest realm will shape shift accordingly. That's fifth density expression. And we're now staggering finally to our feet as a species, wherein we're going to be experiencing that at the collective level, as I said, in the course of our lives.
That's beautiful. Listen, I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that experience. And when you were talking about your girlfriend, shout out to her. And I think that I kept thinking that at least not at least, but mostly she got a gift where you two, where you were there for her, and you guys were together. But I was thinking to myself, like, we can all talk shit and be like, oh, I'm not afraid of death or this and that. But I felt you so much when you said that when you're there with someone going through it and you're there till the last minute and you close the person's eyes, because I went through this just a couple of years ago, it changes you. It's something happens inside of you, especially for me, because I'm talking about my father, because we had this super messed up relationship. So it was so much that I had to, overcome. I'm still overcoming 2 years later. But thank you so much for that, personal experience. That's why we love you so much, because you're able to just, vibe as you are. I forgot to mention that you were in a band, the Stones, if I'm not mistaken. How was that experience? What was that like, and how did it coordinate with your spiritual journey?
So that's also an interesting question for me. Probably boring for some, but for me, an interesting one. It was the Stone Band, and yes, it had a certain renown back in the day, and we are going back quite a while. We're really going back. But that was my life for 9 years, almost 10 years. That was my life, and it was full tilt. Hard rock with the Stone Band, and I reminisce. I look at those days and think, well, I was just very incredibly blessed. I was very precocious, and I was very blessed to have worked with some of the greatest rock and roll musicians of that time. And I'm not going to drop the names now, but anyone who knows my pedigree in music knows the different band members that comprised the Stone Band, because it was a revolving door. A
Mhm.
band members were changing over the years, but I was very, very blessed to work with some incredibly talented guys, and we put out a few albums, and I'm very proud of them. I own all the copyrights, and we owned our own record label, our own publishing house, our own merchandising company, our own management company. So we were fully autonomous. I think we were probably the first rock and roll band that was fully autonomous
Mm.
back in the day. Other bands like Metallica and what have you then were also doing the same thing, becoming their own engine. And although they had big commercial success and we didn't, because we never signed with the
Right.
big the majors, never wanted to, told them to fuck off at the time. I'm delighted that I did. Have
Mhm.
no regrets whatsoever. I thought it was a filthy business, the industry, the music industry. I thought it was a hateful business, but I enjoyed doing what we did when we did it. I'm even thinking of re-releasing the some of the music now, because I bleached it all off the web. There's nothing there. We own the copyright. So people
Mm.
go, "Well, we can't find anything." Well, actually, you can. If you look even for 5 minutes, you'll find they're still hawking bootleg albums at very high premium, I don't mind saying. So the Stone Band albums now are really hard to get hold of, and they are sold on the black market and through bootleggers, and it's delightful. But I'm thinking of re-releasing it just freely, the various albums, because there was really world-class stuff done. I mean, the last album I did, no, the second last album I did, the last album I did was a an instrumental, largely instrumental album. It was flamenco and classical. Warren Wills, the classical pianist, and Esteban Antonio, one of the greatest flamenco guitarists to ever live,
Mm.
unfortunately dead now. We did and myself, we did a beautiful album called Duende, based on the life and times of Garcia
Mm.
Lorca, the Spanish revolutionary poet. And that was some of my prose and Garcia Lorca's prose in a beautiful kind of, yeah, just a weird art album thing. That was the last album I did with those guys. But prior to that, the Stone Band put out an album called Cover the Sun, which was largely produced by one of the greatest producer engineers in rock and roll history, Eddie Kramer, the
Mm.
guy who created the Electric Ladyland sound. He was Jimi Hendrix's engineer, producer, and he came out of retirement to produce tracks on my last album, and that was a piece of history. Getting Eddie Kramer, even Oasis couldn't convince him to produce their album. So I've worked with some of the greats, and that was a long time ago. We never tilted into mainstream
Mm.
popularity because we were frankly blacklisted, if it comes down to it. And I've spoken, and that's fine. It's all fine. And I've spoken about the contract that was ultimately put before me, which absolutely happened.
Mm.
And at some point, if I ever chose to wank in public with writing about my own life. And I don't think I'd ever fall victim to that. But if I felt it was interesting or useful enough to do it, I might write about that chapter of my own life, because it was very interesting. Ultimately being brought to a position where I was sat in front of, in a sense, the devil, and told that hereinafter I would have to sign the contract like tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., kind of thing. And that was very spooky. And that night I had to go home and sit with it and really energetically feel into that. And I knew that my own independence at that point was over. I was told that I would have to drop the band. I would have to drop management. It would be me being rebranded, taken on by the machine, sent across the Atlantic to America on tour with Aerosmith for 6 months to then break me in America. Radio Play had already been bought. MTV had been bought. It was all a done deal. I had to sign the contract, and it was irrevocable. And that I would have as much, gold and pussy and cocaine as I could get. Not that I ever touched drugs, because I never did. But the point being that you are enticed into, you can have everything you ever dreamt of, but you will sign away your publishing. You will have no further executive control in that sense over your life. You will be subjected to the wiles and the fancies of 22, 23, 24-year-old A&R pricks who were living on cocaine. And you would then, I now know retroactively, you would then be also fast-tracked into becoming an orchestrated icon for the satanic ritualism, which is endemic now in the music business. And so that was the time when it was really locking in. That kind of Saturnian iconoclasticism was really being ingrained through rock and roll and pop music. So I'm glad that I did that night go home, deliberate on the offer that was made to me or the instruction that was given to me, and decide, no, I'm going to fall on my sword. I'm not going to relinquish my autonomy over my life, my music, my expression. And it was a really hard night. And to this day, I remember it. I remember being tortured that whole night, staying awake the whole night, sitting with it, and knowing I had to walk away from my dream. And I did. By the following morning, by sunrise, I had totally programmed myself into, no way am I going to sign the devil's contract. And I sent a long fax. I still have an old, faded, bleached out copy of that fax in my records. I saw it a few years ago in one of my files. And that fax was just going, get thee behind me, Satan. No, I don't accept the contract. And I know what that means. I know it means I would never get distribution. I would never get radio play. I would never get listed on MTV again. I'm out. I know that. And so be it. And then I had a bit of a nervous breakdown, because I was in the middle of the studio at that time, still recording another album. And I ended up going out to Morocco and living in Morocco for a couple of years, just escaping from the reality that I had lived in up until that point, which was full tilt rock and roll.
Man, me and you have so much parallels now, I'm realizing, because I went through something like that at 16, as being like the first Ukrainian hip hop artist to rap in English. And it was the same thing. What I wanted to ask you, that night when you were in a hotel room, did you feel like this was a contract for your soul? Like for real, on some real shit?
No, now I know it was retroactively. At the time, I just thought, greedy sons of bitches, that they would put an artist who was a good artist. I'm a good writer.
Incredible artist, man. Incredible.
And I thought, how wicked to put someone who's clearly a very clearly defined artist and tell them
unique, also unique, very unique, man. May I say?
Well, thank you. But to ask that individual to bleach themselves out of existence on a signing of a contract, that's a uniquely wicked thing. But then I understand how it works. I know now enough about, again, the ritual satanic side of the orchestration of evil as it relates to the fashion industry, to the music industry, to Hollywood, to mainstream media, and even into academia. And then you get into captains of industry, the kind of Bill Gateses of this world, and these icons as well. It's all iconoclasticism.
Yes, sir.
Again, whether you're taking a Beyonce or you're taking a Bill Gates or you're taking a Mother Teresa, either way, dealing with Vatican iconoclasticism and how these icons, these archetypal figures are orchestrated in order to become attractors of memes, meme attractors, so that they can drive consensus, drive bad dreaming. And I now understand fully how the Babylonian priesthood, so to speak, or the Sabbatean invisible masters have orchestrated the playground of reality by using and conflating archetypes into icons that are controlled by that centralized Babylonian priesthood. It's very clever stuff, but that again is also part of what is we're departing from that framing of reality now, and those lords of time, those archonic forces, those invisible masters, those Babylonian priests, those Sabbatean bad actors don't have any longer the traction in this world that they've had for thousands of years. That's what Shift Point is all about. It's us moving away from that temporal TikTok 1260 time framing of reality and moving now into the quantum domain of this immanent quantum fifth dimensional upshift. That's where we're at the collective level, even although most humans or many humans have not yet awoken to the majesty of our living moment. They'll get there soon enough. Between now, which is what, I don't even know what year it is, but because I don't register time.
Yeah.
Oh, we're 2025. So between now and 2032, the next 7-year cycle is it's the crucible, and it's Rubicon. It's the place wherein the full tilt alchemization, a psycho-civilizational alchemization of humanity takes place now, real time in Technicolor. The
Beautiful.
next years is going to be the most exquisite, ecstatic, orgasmic experience for many of us, and it's going to be an absolute fucking apocalypse for
Scary
others.
for the other ones. Yeah, I keep saying that, man, that the wicked are scared. Sacha, what I wanted to ask you, can you please talk to the people that only know Islam and maybe Sufism from TV? Why Sufism, why Islam, and what don't the mainstream people know about Islam?
Prove to me that you are alive.